April 23, 1945, 17 kilometers east of the Elbe River crossing at Magdeburg, Germany. The morning air carried the distant rumble of artillery, mixed with the acrid smell of burning fuel, as Hauptfeldwebel Maria Schneider clutched her identification papers with trembling hands, watching American vehicles approach through the morning mist. She and 47 other women from the German Auxiliary Communications Corps believed their training had prepared them for capture, believing they would face the civilized treatment they had been told to expect from Western forces. They had no idea they were about to discover that their survival would depend on men they had been taught to consider inferior, and that these same men would stand between them and a fate far worse than captivity. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What happened over the next 6 days would shatter every assumption these women held about race, humanity, and the true meaning of honor in warfare, transforming enemies into protectors in ways that would echo through their lives for decades to come. The first sign that something was different came when Technical Sergeant Robert Washington of the 761st Tank Battalion stepped out of the lead vehicle. Maria had expected the Americans to be like the propaganda descriptions, crude, undisciplined, perhaps brutal in their victory. Instead, she found herself looking at a man whose bearing spoke of professional military training, whose uniform was clean despite the dust of travel, and whose dark skin immediately challenged everything she thought she knew about the American forces. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Washington," he said in careful German, his pronunciation carrying a slight accent, but his words clear and respectful. "We're here to process your unit for prisoner transfer. If you could please gather your personnel information, we'll begin documentation procedures." Maria exchanged glances with Oberfeldwebel Ingrid Hoffmann, who had served as the unit's communications specialist for 3 years. Both women had been trained to expect immediate interrogation, possible harsh treatment, and certainly not this level of professional courtesy. The propaganda they had absorbed spoke of American forces as disorganized and racially inferior, led by commanders who supposedly lacked the discipline of German military tradition. Yet here stood a man whose demeanor suggested extensive military education and whose approach to their capture followed protocols that seemed more thorough than anything they had experienced in their own army. "Sergeant," Maria replied, her voice steadier than she felt, "my name is Hauptfeldwebel Schneider. These women are all auxiliary communications personnel. We have no intelligence value and pose no security threat." Washington nodded, consulting a clipboard that contained what appeared to be detailed information about their unit. "Ma'am, we understand your designation. However, we have information suggesting Soviet advance units are approximately 18 hours behind our position. We'll need to establish a temporary processing facility here before determining your final destination." The mention of Soviet forces sent a chill through the gathered women that had nothing to do with the April morning air. Every person in Germany had heard stories, some confirmed, others whispered, about the treatment of prisoners and civilians by advancing Soviet forces. The systematic nature of retribution, the particular targeting of women, and the collapse of any pretense of Geneva Convention adherence had become common knowledge among German military personnel. Maria felt her stomach tighten as she realized their capture by American forces might be only a temporary reprieve. Private First Class James Coleman, who had been setting up communication equipment near the vehicles, approached Washington with a radio message. "Sarge, we've got confirmation from Divisional Intelligence. Soviet reconnaissance elements are moving faster than expected. They're now estimated 12 hours out, and they're specifically targeting prisoner collection points." The weight of this information settled over the American soldiers like a physical presence. Maria watched as Washington's expression shifted from professional detachment to something approaching concern. She had studied enough about military operations to understand that 12 hours represented a significant compression of their timeline, and the specific targeting of prisoner collection points suggested something more ominous than routine military advancement. "Coleman, establish perimeter security with the squad leaders," Washington instructed, "and get me a direct line to battalion headquarters. We need clarification on evacuation procedures for auxiliaries." As the American soldiers began establishing their defensive positions, Maria noticed something that contradicted every assumption she had held about their organizational capabilities. The 761st Tank Battalion operated with a level of coordination and technical proficiency that rivaled anything she had observed in German armored units. Their radio procedures were crisp and efficient. Their equipment positioning suggested extensive training in rapid deployment scenarios, and their individual soldiers demonstrated a familiarity with complex mechanical systems that spoke of thorough technical education. Corporal William Thompson, whose responsibility appeared to be medical assessment of prisoners, approached Maria with a clipboard and a manner that immediately distinguished him from the stereotypes she had absorbed. His questions about the health and welfare of her unit were thorough and demonstrated genuine concern for their well-being rather than simple administrative necessity. "Ma'am, do any of your personnel require immediate medical attention?" Thompson asked, his German pronunciation showing the results of formal language training. "We have medical supplies and a qualified medic available, and we want to ensure everyone receives appropriate care." Maria found herself struggling to reconcile this level of concern with everything she had been taught about American forces. The propaganda had emphasized their supposed lack of discipline, their presumed racial inferiority, and their alleged inability to maintain military standards. Yet these soldiers demonstrated professionalism that exceeded her expectations and showed genuine concern for prisoner welfare that went beyond minimum requirements. "We have 3 women with minor injuries from our retreat," Maria replied, indicating Feldwebel Ruth Müller, who had twisted her ankle during their hasty evacuation, and 2 others who showed signs of exhaustion and dehydration. "But nothing that requires urgent intervention." Thompson nodded and immediately moved to examine the injured women, his medical assessment thorough and his treatment gentle but competent. Maria watched as he cleaned Müller's sprained ankle with practiced efficiency, applied proper bandaging, and provided her with pain medication from what appeared to be well-stocked medical supplies. His bedside manner was professional yet reassuring, and he took time to explain his treatment in simple German, ensuring his patients understood their care. The revelation of Soviet approach times created an undercurrent of tension that began to affect both American soldiers and German prisoners. Maria had served long enough to recognize the signs of military units preparing for potential combat operations, and she could see those same indicators appearing among the American forces. Equipment checks became more frequent, radio communications increased in both volume and urgency, and individual soldiers began showing the heightened awareness that preceded anticipated enemy contact. Staff Sergeant Michael Davis, who appeared to serve as Washington's second-in-command, approached the group with information that would prove crucial to their developing situation. "Sergeant Washington, I've been monitoring Soviet communications through our intelligence unit. They're broadcasting specific orders regarding the treatment of German auxiliaries, particularly women who served in communication roles." Washington's expression darkened as he reviewed the intelligence report Davis handed him. Maria could not read the document, but she could interpret the American soldiers' reactions to its contents, the subtle shift in their postures, the increased urgency in their movements, and the way they began looking at the German women with what appeared to be protective concern rather than simple administrative responsibility. "Davis, what's our current evacuation timeline?" Washington asked, his voice carrying a new edge of urgency. "Battalion says they can have transport here in approximately 8 hours, Davis replied. "But that's cutting it very close with the Soviet advance schedule. And, sir, there's another complication. Intelligence indicates the Soviet units approaching this area include elements specifically tasked with prisoner interrogation and political investigation." The implications of this information were not lost on Maria, who had heard enough about Soviet prisoner interrogation techniques to understand that their capture by such units would likely result in outcomes far worse than conventional prisoner-of-war treatment. The systematic nature of Soviet retribution, combined with their specific targeting of communication personnel, who might possess intelligence about German military operations, created a scenario where survival became questionable. As the morning progressed, Maria began to observe details about the American unit that challenged everything she thought she understood about military organization and racial dynamics. The 761st Tank Battalion operated as a fully integrated fighting force, where individual competence and military professionalism took precedence over racial considerations. She watched as soldiers of different backgrounds worked together with a level of coordination that suggested extensive shared training and mutual respect. Technical Sergeant Charles Johnson, who was responsible for mechanical maintenance, demonstrated expertise with tank engines and transmission systems that would have impressed German panzer mechanics. His diagnostic procedures were methodical and thorough, his repairs efficient and professionally executed, and his technical knowledge appeared to encompass both American and captured German equipment. When one of the American tanks developed transmission problems, Johnson diagnosed and repaired the issue in less than an hour, working with a competence that contradicted every assumption about technical abilities that Maria had absorbed from propaganda sources. "Schneider," Oberfeldwebel Hoffmann whispered, moving closer to Maria while keeping her voice low enough to avoid American attention. "Have you noticed how they operate? This is not what we were told to expect." Maria nodded, her own observations confirming Hoffmann's assessment. The American soldiers demonstrated individual initiative combined with unit cohesion in ways that suggested extensive training and high morale. Their equipment was well maintained, their procedures efficient, and their treatment of prisoners exceeded Geneva Convention requirements. Most significantly, their racial integration appeared to enhance rather than diminish their military effectiveness, contradicting fundamental assumptions about racial hierarchy that had formed the basis of German military education. The arrival of additional American vehicles brought reinforcements that would prove crucial to the developing situation. Captain Franklin Roosevelt Walker of the 527th Quartermaster Battalion brought not only additional personnel but also intelligence updates that painted a clearer picture of their tactical situation. His briefing to Washington included information that would determine the fate of all personnel at the collection point. "Sergeant Washington, Soviet advance elements are now confirmed 6 hours out, and they're moving in greater strength than initially estimated," Walker reported. "Additionally, we have confirmation that they're specifically targeting locations where German auxiliaries are being processed. Intelligence suggests they have particular interest in communication personnel who might possess information about German defensive preparations." The compression of their timeline from 12 hours to 6 hours transformed their situation from challenging to potentially critical. Maria understood enough about military logistics to recognize that evacuating 48 prisoners, plus American personnel and equipment in 6 hours, required careful coordination and significant transportation assets. The added complication of specific Soviet interest in communication personnel created an additional layer of urgency that affected everyone at the processing site. Corporal Anthony Brown, who served as the unit's intelligence specialist, approached Washington with additional information that would prove instrumental in shaping their response to the developing crisis. His analysis of Soviet communications and movement patterns provided details that clarified the nature of the threat facing the German prisoners. "Sergeant, I have been analyzing intercepted Soviet communications," Brown reported. "Their targeting of prisoner collection points appears to be part of a systematic campaign to identify and interrogate German personnel who might possess intelligence about defensive preparations or technological information. Communication auxiliaries are specifically mentioned as high-priority targets for enhanced interrogation procedures." The term enhanced interrogation procedures carried implications that were understood by both American soldiers and German prisoners. Maria felt her blood chill as she realized that their capture by advancing Soviet forces would likely result in treatment that bore no resemblance to conventional prisoner-of-war protocols. The systematic nature of Soviet retribution, combined with their specific interest in extracting intelligence through any means necessary, created a scenario where survival became highly questionable. Washington consulted his watch and made a decision that would define the next phase of their situation. Brown, establish communication with divisional headquarters and request immediate evacuation priority for prisoner transport. Davis, begin preparing defensive positions in case we need to delay Soviet advance elements. Thompson, ensure all prisoners are ready for immediate movement, if transportation becomes available. The transformation of the American unit from prisoner processing to potential combat defense demonstrated organizational capabilities that impressed Maria despite her circumstances. She watched as individual soldiers transitioned seamlessly between administrative duties and tactical preparations, their movements efficient and their coordination suggesting extensive combat experience. Their ability to adapt rapidly to changing tactical situations contradicted assumptions about American military competence that had been fundamental to German strategic planning. As defensive preparations began, Maria found herself in the unexpected position of observing American military procedures from an insider perspective. The establishment of perimeter security, the positioning of heavy weapons, and the coordination of communications demonstrated tactical sophistication that would have impressed German military observers. More significantly, she began to understand that these soldiers were preparing to risk their own safety to protect prisoners who had recently been their enemies. Private First Class Robert Young, who was establishing a communications post, worked with radio equipment that appeared more advanced than comparable German systems. His technical proficiency with complex electronic devices, combined with his ability to establish and maintain communications with multiple units simultaneously, demonstrated educational and training standards that contradicted propaganda claims about American technical capabilities. "Schneider," Young said in halting German, having overheard her commenting on the radio equipment, "this frequency modulation system allows simultaneous communication with division, battalion, and company-level units, while maintaining operational security. Would you like me to explain how the encryption protocols work?" The offer to explain American military communications security procedures to a German prisoner represented a level of trust and openness that Maria found completely unexpected. Young's willingness to share technical information, combined with his assumption that she possessed sufficient technical knowledge to understand complex communication systems, demonstrated respect for her professional competence that transcended their respective nationalities. As the afternoon progressed, the tactical situation continued to evolve in ways that increased pressure on both American forces and German prisoners. Reports from reconnaissance elements indicated that Soviet advance units were maintaining their accelerated timeline and had begun targeting specific locations where American forces were known to be processing prisoners. The systematic nature of this targeting suggested intelligence capabilities that allowed Soviet commanders to identify and prioritize prisoner collection points with significant accuracy. Sergeant Washington assembled his unit leaders for a tactical assessment that would determine their response to the developing crisis. Maria, positioned close enough to overhear portions of their discussion, gained insights into American decision-making processes that challenged her assumptions about military leadership and unit cohesion. "Gentlemen, we have a situation that requires immediate decision-making," Washington began, his tone carrying the authority of command, combined with genuine concern for both his soldiers and their prisoners. "Soviet forces are approximately 4 hours out, and evacuation transport is still 3 hours away at minimum. We need to determine whether we establish a defensive position or attempt to relocate with prisoners to a more secure location." Staff Sergeant Davis consulted tactical maps and intelligence reports before responding. "Sir, our defensive position here is adequate for delaying actions, but we're not equipped for extended combat operations. However, attempting to move 48 prisoners plus our equipment and personnel in available vehicles would leave us exposed during movement and potentially compromise our ability to respond to contact." The complexity of their tactical situation demonstrated command responsibilities that went beyond simple military objectives. Washington and his subordinate leaders were weighing the safety of their own personnel against their obligations to protect prisoners, while simultaneously considering broader strategic implications of their decisions. Maria began to understand that these soldiers were prepared to accept significant personal risk to fulfill their responsibilities to prisoners who had recently been their enemies. Technical Sergeant Johnson provided additional perspective based on his assessment of their mechanical capabilities. "Sir, we have sufficient transportation for all personnel, but our vehicles are not designed for high-speed evacuation under potential combat conditions. If we encounter Soviet advance elements during movement, our ability to protect prisoners while maintaining defensive capabilities would be severely compromised. The technical assessment of their transportation limitations highlighted the difficult choices facing the American unit. Their commitment to prisoner safety conflicted with tactical considerations that favored mobility over defensive preparation, while time constraints limited their options for resolving these competing priorities. Maria watched as Washington weighed alternatives that would determine the fate of everyone at the collection point. Corporal Thompson approached with medical assessments that added another dimension to their tactical planning. "Sir, 3 of the prisoners require ongoing medical monitoring, and extended movement under stress conditions could worsen their conditions. Additionally, several prisoners are showing signs of exhaustion that could compromise their ability to move rapidly if required." The medical considerations introduced humanitarian factors that complicated their tactical decision-making. Washington's willingness to consider prisoner welfare in his tactical planning demonstrated leadership priorities that surprised Maria, who had expected military efficiency to take precedence over humanitarian concerns. The American commander appeared to view prisoner protection as a military obligation rather than an administrative inconvenience. As discussions continued, Maria began to understand the full complexity of their situation. The American soldiers were essentially choosing between tactical options that prioritized their own safety and alternatives that increased their personal risk while providing better protection for German prisoners. The systematic Soviet targeting of prisoner collection points meant that remaining in position increased the likelihood of combat contact, while movement exposed both soldiers and prisoners to additional risks during transportation. The arrival of additional intelligence from reconnaissance elements provided information that would prove crucial to their final tactical decisions. Corporal Brown approached Washington with communications intercepts that clarified Soviet intentions regarding prisoner treatment and collection procedures. "Sir, we have confirmed intelligence about Soviet procedures for handling captured German auxiliaries," Brown reported, his expression grim. "Communication personnel are being transferred to specialized interrogation facilities where conventional prisoner protections do not apply. Additionally, Soviet units have specific orders regarding the treatment of German women who served in military capacities. The implications of this intelligence transformed their situation from tactically challenging to morally imperative." Maria understood enough about Soviet prisoner procedures to recognize that capture by advancing Soviet forces would result in outcomes that bore no resemblance to conventional prisoner treatment. The systematic nature of Soviet retribution, combined with their specific targeting of communication personnel and military women, created scenarios where survival became highly questionable. Washington's response to this intelligence demonstrated leadership characteristics that impressed Maria, despite her circumstances. Rather than viewing prisoner protection as a burden that complicated their tactical situation, he appeared to consider it a primary mission requirement that justified accepting significant personal risk for his unit. Brown, establish immediate communication with higher headquarters and request emergency evacuation priority, Washington ordered. Davis, begin implementing defensive preparations for extended operations. Thompson, prepare medical supplies for potential casualties among both personnel and prisoners. Johnson, ensure all vehicles are prepared for either defensive operations or emergency evacuation, as circumstances require. The comprehensive nature of Washington's preparations demonstrated military planning capabilities that included contingencies for multiple tactical scenarios while maintaining focus on prisoner protection. Maria watched as his subordinate leaders implemented these orders with efficiency that suggested extensive training in complex operational procedures. Their ability to prepare simultaneously for defensive operations and evacuation procedures demonstrated organizational flexibility that impressed German military observers. As defensive preparations intensified, Maria found herself observing American military procedures that challenged fundamental assumptions about their organizational capabilities. The positioning of heavy weapons demonstrated tactical knowledge that would have impressed German military instructors, while their coordination of communications and logistics suggested extensive combat experience. Most significantly, their integration of prisoner protection into tactical planning demonstrated humanitarian priorities that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements. Private First Class Coleman, who was establishing observation posts, demonstrated individual initiative combined with technical competence that surprised Maria. His selection of positions showed understanding of tactical principles that encompassed both defensive preparation and prisoner protection, while his use of available terrain demonstrated training in military engineering that she had not expected from American forces. "Ma'am," Coleman addressed Maria while establishing a communications post near the prisoner assembly area. "If shooting starts, we'll need you and your people to remain in this location where we can provide protection. These earthworks should provide adequate cover from small arms fire, and we'll have medical personnel nearby in case anyone needs assistance." The detailed nature of Coleman's preparations for prisoner protection during potential combat operations demonstrated humanitarian priorities that Maria found completely unexpected. American soldiers were preparing to risk their own safety to provide protection for prisoners who had recently been their enemies, while ensuring that defensive preparations included provisions for prisoner welfare during combat operations. As afternoon turned toward evening, the tactical situation continued to evolve in ways that increased urgency for all personnel at the collection point. Reports from forward reconnaissance elements indicated that Soviet advance units had accelerated their timeline and were now estimated 3 hours from their position. The compression of their available time from 6 hours to 3 hours transformed their situation from challenging to critical. The arrival of Battalion Executive Officer Major Harold Washington brought command authority and additional resources that would prove instrumental in resolving their developing crisis. His assessment of their tactical situation included strategic considerations that encompassed both immediate prisoner protection and broader operational requirements. "Sergeant Washington, I've reviewed your situation reports and the intelligence assessments regarding Soviet prisoner procedures," Major Washington reported. "Divisional Command has authorized emergency evacuation procedures, but transportation assets are delayed due to Soviet interdiction of primary evacuation routes. You're authorized to implement whatever measures necessary to protect prisoners until alternative evacuation becomes available." The authorization to implement whatever measures necessary represented a significant expansion of tactical options while emphasizing prisoner protection as a primary mission requirement. Maria understood that this directive gave the American unit considerable freedom in choosing their response to Soviet approach, while clearly establishing prisoner safety as a command priority that justified significant resource allocation and personal risk. Staff Sergeant Davis consulted updated intelligence reports before providing tactical assessments that would influence their final preparations. "Sir, Soviet reconnaissance elements are now confirmed 2.5 hours out, and they appear to be moving with greater strength than initially estimated. Additionally, intelligence indicates they're carrying specialized equipment for prisoner interrogation and transport." The mention of specialized equipment for prisoner interrogation carried implications that were understood by everyone present. Maria felt her pulse quicken as she realized that Soviet forces were approaching with specific preparation for capturing and processing German prisoners, particularly those with potential intelligence value. The systematic nature of their approach suggested organization and planning that went beyond routine military operations. Technical Sergeant Johnson provided updates on their defensive capabilities that demonstrated both their strengths and limitations in the developing situation. "Sir, we have adequate firepower and ammunition for defensive operations, but we're not equipped for extended combat against superior numbers. However, our position provides good fields of fire, and we have sufficient supplies to maintain defensive operations for several hours if necessary." The assessment of their defensive capabilities highlighted both their ability to provide prisoner protection and the limitations of their tactical situation. Johnson's analysis suggested that American forces could successfully defend their position for several hours, providing adequate time for evacuation if transportation became available, while acknowledging that extended combat operations against superior numbers would eventually overwhelm their defensive capabilities. As defensive preparations neared completion, Maria began to understand the full scope of American commitment to prisoner protection. Every aspect of their tactical planning included provisions for prisoner safety, while their defensive preparations demonstrated professional military competence that exceeded her expectations. Most significantly, individual soldiers continued to treat German prisoners with respect and consideration that went beyond minimum requirements, despite the increasing pressure of their tactical situation. Corporal Thompson approached Maria with medical supplies and instructions that demonstrated continuing concern for prisoner welfare despite their deteriorating tactical situation. "Ma'am, I want you to have these medical supplies in case anyone needs assistance during the next few hours," he explained, handing her a well-stocked medical kit. The bandages and antiseptic are clearly marked, and there are pain medications if anyone has problems with previous injuries. The provision of medical supplies to prisoners during preparation for potential combat operations represented a level of trust and humanitarian concern that Maria found extraordinary. Thompson's willingness to provide medical resources to former enemies, combined with his assumption that she possessed sufficient medical knowledge to use them effectively, demonstrated respect for her competence and genuine concern for prisoner welfare. The sound of distant artillery provided the first indication that Soviet forces were closer than estimated. The rumbling that had been barely audible in the morning had intensified throughout the day, and now carried the unmistakable signature of heavy weapons being moved closer to their position. Maria felt her stomach tighten as she realized that their tactical situation had deteriorated beyond the most pessimistic estimates. Sergeant Washington assembled his unit for final preparations that would determine their response to imminent Soviet contact. His briefing to subordinate leaders included tactical assignments that demonstrated both military professionalism and unwavering commitment to prisoner protection. "Gentlemen, Soviet forces are now estimated 90 minutes out, and we have no confirmation of evacuation transport availability," Washington reported. "We will establish and maintain defensive positions until evacuation becomes available, or until tactical circumstances require alternative action. Prisoner protection remains our primary mission requirement, and all tactical decisions will be made with that priority in mind." The clarity of Washington's mission statement demonstrated leadership priorities that impressed Maria despite the deteriorating circumstances. His willingness to maintain prisoner protection as a primary mission requirement while preparing for combat operations against superior numbers showed command commitment that exceeded conventional military obligations. Individual soldiers responded to his briefing with efficiency that suggested extensive training in complex operational scenarios. Private First Class Young established final communications checks that provided updates on their tactical situation while maintaining contact with higher headquarters. His reports included position updates, personnel status, and intelligence assessments that demonstrated professional communications procedures under pressure. Maria watched as he coordinated multiple radio frequencies simultaneously while maintaining detailed logs of all communications. The approach of Soviet forces became increasingly evident as distant engine sounds joined the artillery rumble that had grown steadily throughout the day. The mechanical signature of tracked vehicles moving across terrain provided confirmation that armored units were approaching their position, while the increasing volume suggested numbers that exceeded initial intelligence estimates. Staff Sergeant Davis established final defensive positions that demonstrated tactical knowledge while incorporating prisoner protection requirements. His placement of weapons and personnel showed understanding of defensive principles that encompassed both combat effectiveness and humanitarian obligations, while his coordination of fields of fire ensured maximum defensive capability without compromising prisoner safety. As the first Soviet reconnaissance elements appeared in the distance, Maria experienced a moment of realization that would define her understanding of humanity, courage, and moral obligation for the rest of her life. The American soldiers who had captured her unit were now preparing to risk their lives to protect prisoners who had recently been their enemies, demonstrating courage and humanitarian commitment that transcended racial, national, and ideological boundaries. Technical Sergeant Johnson made final equipment checks while maintaining conversation with German prisoners that demonstrated continuing concern for their welfare despite imminent combat contact. "Ladies, when this starts, stay low and follow instructions from any American soldier," he advised in careful German. "We're going to keep you safe, but we need your cooperation to do it effectively." The simplicity and sincerity of Johnson's promise to keep them safe despite the overwhelming tactical odds created an emotional impact that Maria found difficult to process. These soldiers were preparing to fight against superior numbers to protect prisoners, who represented everything they had been fighting against, while maintaining personal commitment to humanitarian principles that exceeded any military requirement. The appearance of Soviet advance elements on the distant horizon provided visual confirmation of intelligence estimates while revealing the scope of forces approaching their position. Through the dust and haze of late afternoon, Maria could distinguish the angular silhouettes of Soviet tanks and armored vehicles moving in formation that suggested significant numerical superiority. The systematic nature of their approach indicated tactical organization and planning that confirmed their specific targeting of the prisoner collection point. Corporal Brown provided final intelligence updates that clarified Soviet intentions, while confirming their determination to capture German prisoners for specialized interrogation procedures. "Sir, intercepted communications confirm this is a dedicated prisoner recovery operation with specialized interrogation personnel," he reported. "They have specific orders regarding communication auxiliaries and particular interest in technical personnel with potential intelligence value." The confirmation that Soviet forces were conducting a dedicated prisoner recovery operation rather than routine military advancement transformed the tactical situation from challenging to desperate. Maria understood that her capture by these forces would result in interrogation procedures that bore no resemblance to conventional prisoner treatment, while her technical knowledge of German communication systems made her a priority target for enhanced interrogation techniques. As Soviet forces closed to visual range, Sergeant Washington made final preparations that demonstrated both military competence and unwavering humanitarian commitment. His instructions to subordinate leaders included specific provisions for prisoner protection during combat operations while maintaining tactical effectiveness against superior numbers. "Davis, establish overlapping fields of fire that provide maximum defensive coverage while maintaining prisoner safety zones," Washington ordered. "Thompson, prepare medical stations for both American and German casualties. Johnson, ensure all vehicles are prepared for emergency evacuation if opportunities arise. Brown, maintain communication with higher headquarters and continue monitoring Soviet communications for tactical intelligence." The comprehensive nature of Washington's final preparations demonstrated military leadership that balanced tactical requirements with humanitarian obligations in ways that impressed Maria despite her circumstances. His subordinate leaders responded with efficiency that suggested extensive training in complex operational scenarios, while their implementation of his orders showed professional competence that exceeded her expectations of American military capabilities. The moment when Soviet forces came within effective range marked the beginning of what would prove to be the most significant 6 hours in Maria's life. The first exchange of fire between American defensive positions and Soviet advance elements demonstrated both the tactical competence of the defending forces and their unwavering commitment to prisoner protection under the most challenging circumstances. Private First Class Coleman, who was manning a defensive position with clear fields of fire toward approaching Soviet forces, maintained conversation with German prisoners while preparing for combat contact. "Ma'am, you and your people need to stay in the covered positions we showed you," he advised Maria. "We're going to handle this situation, but you need to follow our instructions exactly if you want everyone to stay safe." The matter-of-fact nature of Coleman's promise to handle the tactical situation demonstrated confidence and professional competence that Maria found reassuring despite their overwhelming numerical disadvantage. His continued concern for prisoner safety, while preparing for combat operations, showed individual character that transcended military obligation while demonstrating courage that exceeded any conventional requirement. As combat operations commenced, Maria found herself in the unprecedented position of observing American military capabilities under actual combat conditions, while simultaneously being protected by soldiers who had every tactical reason to consider prisoners a burden rather than a responsibility. The efficiency of their defensive operations, combined with their continued attention to prisoner welfare, demonstrated military professionalism and humanitarian commitment that challenged every assumption she had held about American forces. Technical Sergeant Johnson coordinated defensive fire while maintaining awareness of prisoner positions and safety requirements. His tactical competence under pressure demonstrated military training that would have impressed German military observers, while his continued concern for prisoner welfare showed individual character that exceeded conventional military obligations. Maria watched as he directed defensive operations with professional efficiency, while ensuring that combat actions never compromised prisoner safety. The intensity of Soviet attacks on their defensive positions demonstrated both the determination of attacking forces to capture German prisoners and the tactical competence of defending American forces in maintaining both defensive effectiveness and prisoner protection. Exchange of fire continued for several hours, with American defensive positions successfully repelling multiple Soviet attempts to penetrate their perimeter, while maintaining complete protection of German prisoners throughout the engagement. Staff Sergeant Davis coordinated tactical communications while ensuring that combat operations never compromised their primary mission of prisoner protection. His management of defensive operations under pressure demonstrated military competence that impressed German military observers, while his continued attention to prisoner welfare showed humanitarian commitment that exceeded conventional military requirements. As combat operations extended into evening hours, the tactical situation began to evolve in ways that demonstrated both American defensive capabilities and Soviet determination to capture prisoners for specialized interrogation procedures. Multiple assault attempts had been successfully repelled, while American casualties remained minimal due to excellent defensive preparation and tactical competence under pressure. The arrival of American reinforcements during the height of combat operations provided additional defensive capabilities, while confirming command commitment to prisoner protection as a primary mission requirement. Additional personnel and equipment allowed the defending force to maintain defensive effectiveness, while ensuring continued prisoner safety throughout extended combat operations. Major Washington coordinated reinforcement operations while maintaining focus on prisoner protection as the primary mission objective. His management of complex tactical operations under pressure demonstrated command competence that impressed German military observers, while his unwavering commitment to prisoner welfare showed humanitarian priorities that exceeded conventional military obligations. The successful defense of their position throughout 6 hours of combat operations demonstrated American military capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about their organizational competence and tactical effectiveness. More significantly, their maintenance of prisoner protection as a primary mission requirement throughout extended combat operations showed humanitarian commitment that transcended conventional military obligations. As Soviet forces finally withdrew after unsuccessful attempts to capture prisoners through direct assault, the tactical situation evolved into a successful defense that preserved both American personnel and German prisoners, while demonstrating military competence and humanitarian commitment that impressed all observers. The aftermath of combat operations provided time for reflection on the events of the previous 6 hours, while confirming the successful achievement of both tactical objectives and humanitarian obligations. American forces had successfully defended their position against superior numbers, while maintaining complete protection of German prisoners throughout extended combat operations. Corporal Thompson provided medical assessment and treatment for both American personnel and German prisoners, while demonstrating continuing humanitarian concern that exceeded conventional military requirements. His professional medical competence under pressure impressed German military observers, while his equal treatment of American soldiers and German prisoners showed individual character that transcended national and ideological boundaries. The arrival of evacuation transport during early morning hours provided confirmation that American command priorities included prisoner protection as a primary mission requirement that justified significant resource allocation and personal risk. The successful completion of prisoner evacuation demonstrated both tactical competence and humanitarian commitment that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements. As evacuation operations commenced, Maria experienced a final moment of realization about the character and capabilities of the American soldiers who had protected her and her unit throughout their most dangerous hours. Their military competence had exceeded her expectations, while their humanitarian commitment had demonstrated individual character that transcended conventional military obligations. Technical Sergeant Johnson coordinated evacuation procedures while maintaining concern for prisoner welfare during transportation operations. His professional competence in logistics and transportation impressed German military observers, while his continued attention to prisoner comfort and safety showed individual character that exceeded conventional military requirements. The successful completion of evacuation operations marked the end of a 6-day period that had challenged every assumption Maria held about race, nationality, military competence, and human character under pressure. The American soldiers who had captured and protected her unit had demonstrated capabilities and humanitarian commitment that exceeded every expectation while maintaining individual character that transcended conventional military obligations. During transportation to permanent prisoner facilities, Maria had opportunity to reflect on the events of the previous 6 days while processing the implications of her experiences with American forces. The military competence she had observed challenged propaganda assumptions about American capabilities, while the humanitarian treatment she had received exceeded Geneva Convention requirements. Staff Sergeant Davis, who was coordinating prisoner transportation, maintained conversation with German prisoners during movement to permanent facilities while demonstrating continuing concern for their welfare throughout the process. His professional competence in logistics and prisoner management impressed German military observers, while his individual character exceeded conventional military obligations. The arrival at permanent prisoner facilities provided confirmation that American prisoner treatment policies emphasized humanitarian considerations that exceeded international requirements while maintaining security protocols that balanced prisoner welfare with operational necessities. The facilities demonstrated organizational capabilities and humanitarian priorities that challenged assumptions about American military competence. As processing procedures commenced at permanent facilities, Maria began to understand the broader implications of her experiences with American forces during the previous 6 days. The military competence she had observed contradicted propaganda assumptions, while the humanitarian treatment she had received demonstrated individual character and institutional priorities that exceeded conventional expectations. The comprehensive nature of American prisoner processing procedures demonstrated both organizational competence and humanitarian commitment that impressed German military observers while providing prisoner treatment that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements. Individual personnel continued to demonstrate professional competence and personal character that transcended conventional military obligations. During extended interaction with American military personnel at permanent facilities, Maria continued to observe capabilities and character that challenged fundamental assumptions about race, nationality, and military competence, while demonstrating humanitarian priorities that exceeded international requirements. The consistency of individual behavior and institutional policies confirmed that her experiences during capture and protection represented standard American military practice rather than exceptional circumstances. The opportunity to interact with other German prisoners who had been captured by different American units provided confirmation that her experiences represented typical American military practice rather than exceptional humanitarian treatment. Similar accounts of military competence and humanitarian consideration from multiple sources demonstrated institutional priorities that exceeded conventional expectations while challenging propaganda assumptions about American capabilities. Technical discussions with American communications personnel provided insights into technological capabilities that contradicted assumptions about American military competence while demonstrating educational standards and technical training that exceeded expectations. Individual soldiers demonstrated technical knowledge and professional competence that challenged fundamental assumptions about military capabilities and organizational effectiveness. The provision of educational opportunities and recreational activities for prisoners demonstrated American priorities that emphasized humanitarian consideration and individual dignity while maintaining security requirements that balanced prisoner welfare with operational necessities. Programs demonstrated organizational capabilities and individual character that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements while providing prisoner treatment that impressed international observers. Extended observation of American military organization and individual behavior confirmed that capabilities and humanitarian priorities exceeded propaganda assumptions while demonstrating institutional commitment to prisoner welfare that transcended conventional military obligations. Consistency of individual character and organizational policies provided confirmation that initial experiences represented standard practice rather than exceptional circumstances. The gradual development of personal relationships with American military personnel provided insights into individual character and cultural values that challenged assumptions about race, nationality, and social organization, while demonstrating humanitarian priorities that transcended conventional boundaries. Personal interactions confirmed that individual competence and character exceeded stereotypical expectations while providing evidence of educational and social development that contradicted propaganda assumptions. Sergeant Washington's continued involvement in prisoner welfare throughout extended facility operations demonstrated individual character and professional commitment that exceeded conventional military obligations while providing leadership example that influenced subordinate personnel and prisoner treatment policies. His personal attention to prisoner concerns showed humanitarian priorities that transcended routine administrative requirements while maintaining military efficiency and organizational effectiveness. The availability of medical care and educational programs for prisoners demonstrated American institutional priorities that emphasized individual dignity and humanitarian consideration while maintaining security protocols that balanced prisoner welfare with operational requirements. Services exceeded Geneva Convention requirements while providing prisoner treatment that impressed international observers and challenged assumptions about American military capabilities. Regular interaction with American personnel from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds provided confirmation that organizational effectiveness and individual competence transcended conventional assumptions about social hierarchy, while demonstrating educational standards and professional development that exceeded expectations. Individual capabilities and character challenged propaganda assumptions, while providing evidence of social organization that prioritized competence over racial considerations. The systematic nature of American prisoner treatment policies demonstrated institutional commitment to humanitarian principles that exceeded international requirements while maintaining organizational effectiveness and military discipline that impressed professional observers. Consistency of individual behavior and policy implementation provided confirmation that humanitarian priorities represented fundamental American values rather than temporary wartime expedients. Extended facility operations provided opportunities to observe American logistical capabilities and organizational effectiveness that challenged assumptions about military competence while demonstrating resource management and operational efficiency that exceeded expectations. Individual personnel continued to demonstrate professional competence and personal character that transcended conventional military obligations while maintaining humanitarian priorities throughout extended operations. The provision of communication opportunities with families and international organizations demonstrated American commitment to prisoner welfare that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements while providing humanitarian consideration that impressed international observers. Policies demonstrated institutional priorities that emphasized individual dignity and family connections while maintaining security requirements that balanced prisoner welfare with operational necessities. Educational programs and recreational activities provided evidence of American commitment to prisoner welfare that transcended conventional military obligations while demonstrating humanitarian priorities that exceeded international requirements. Individual personnel showed personal commitment to prisoner development and individual dignity that challenged assumptions about military priorities and organizational effectiveness. The opportunity to observe American society through interaction with civilian personnel and community organizations provided insights into cultural values and social organization that challenged assumptions about racial hierarchy and social development while demonstrating educational standards and humanitarian priorities that exceeded expectations. Community involvement in prisoner welfare showed civilian commitment to humanitarian principles that transcended conventional boundaries. Regular medical examinations and healthcare services demonstrated American commitment to prisoner welfare that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements while providing medical treatment that impressed international observers. Individual medical personnel showed professional competence and personal concern that transcended conventional obligations while maintaining humanitarian priorities throughout extended operations. The systematic documentation of prisoner treatment and welfare provided evidence of American commitment to transparency and international oversight that exceeded conventional requirements while demonstrating institutional priorities that emphasized accountability and humanitarian consideration. Policies showed organizational commitment to prisoner welfare that transcended military expedience while maintaining operational effectiveness and security requirements. Communication with international inspection teams and humanitarian organizations provided confirmation that American prisoner treatment exceeded international standards while demonstrating transparency and accountability that impressed professional observers. Individual personnel continued to demonstrate humanitarian priorities and professional competence that transcended conventional military obligations throughout extended facility operations. The availability of legal representation and administrative procedures provided evidence of American commitment to individual rights and due process that exceeded conventional prisoner treatment while demonstrating institutional priorities that emphasized justice and humanitarian consideration. Services provided prisoner protection that transcended military requirements while maintaining organizational effectiveness and operational security. Extended interaction with American educational and religious personnel provided insights into cultural values and individual character that challenged assumptions about social organization and humanitarian priorities while demonstrating commitment to prisoner welfare that exceeded conventional expectations. Individual personnel showed personal dedication to humanitarian principles that transcended professional obligations while maintaining cultural sensitivity and individual respect. The systematic provision of recreational and cultural activities demonstrated American commitment to prisoner welfare that recognized individual dignity and cultural identity while maintaining security requirements that balanced operational necessities with humanitarian consideration. Programs exceeded Geneva Convention requirements while providing prisoner treatment that impressed international observers and challenged conventional assumptions about military priorities. Regular communication opportunities with family members and international organizations provided confirmation of American commitment to prisoner welfare that transcended conventional military obligations while demonstrating humanitarian priorities that exceeded international requirements. Policies showed institutional dedication to individual dignity and family connections that impressed professional observers while maintaining operational effectiveness and security protocols. The comprehensive nature of prisoner welfare programs demonstrated American institutional commitment to humanitarian principles that exceeded conventional expectations while providing individual treatment that challenged assumptions about military priorities and organizational effectiveness. Consistency of individual behavior and policy implementation confirmed that humanitarian consideration represented fundamental values rather than temporary wartime expedients. As Maria's time in American custody extended through months of facility operations, her observations of individual character and institutional priorities continued to challenge assumptions about race, nationality, and military competence, while demonstrating humanitarian commitment that exceeded conventional expectations. The consistency of treatment and individual behavior provided confirmation that her initial experiences represented standard American practice rather than exceptional circumstances. The opportunity to participate in educational programs and cultural activities provided evidence of American commitment to prisoner development and individual dignity that transcended conventional military obligations while demonstrating humanitarian priorities that exceeded international requirements. Programs showed institutional dedication to prisoner welfare that impressed international observers while maintaining operational effectiveness and security requirements. Extended observation of American military organization and civilian involvement in prisoner welfare provided insights into social values and institutional priorities that challenged assumptions about cultural development and humanitarian commitment, while demonstrating individual character that exceeded conventional expectations. Community participation in prisoner programs showed civilian dedication to humanitarian principles that transcended conventional boundaries while maintaining cultural sensitivity and individual respect. The systematic provision of medical care and psychological support demonstrated American commitment to prisoner welfare that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements while providing individual treatment that impressed international observers. Professional competence and personal concern shown by individual personnel transcended conventional obligations while maintaining humanitarian priorities throughout extended operations and organizational effectiveness. Communication opportunities with international humanitarian organizations and family members provided confirmation of American transparency and accountability that exceeded conventional requirements while demonstrating institutional commitment to prisoner welfare that transcended military expedients. Policies showed organizational dedication to individual dignity and international oversight that impressed professional observers while maintaining operational security and effectiveness. The comprehensive nature of prisoner treatment policies and individual behavior demonstrated American commitment to humanitarian principles that exceeded international expectations while providing evidence of institutional priorities that transcended conventional military obligations. Consistency of treatment and organizational effectiveness confirmed that humanitarian consideration represented fundamental values that influenced both individual behavior and policy implementation throughout extended operations. As her period of captivity drew toward conclusion, Maria experienced final reflections on the transformative nature of her experiences with American forces, while recognizing the implications of her observations for understanding race, nationality, military competence, and human character under challenging circumstances. The humanitarian treatment she had received challenged every assumption while demonstrating individual character and institutional priorities that exceeded conventional expectations. The systematic preparation for prisoner repatriation demonstrated American commitment to humanitarian principles and international cooperation that exceeded conventional requirements, while providing individual consideration that impressed international observers. Procedures showed institutional dedication to prisoner welfare that transcended military obligations, while maintaining organizational effectiveness and operational security throughout complex repatriation processes. Final interactions with American military and civilian personnel provided confirmation of individual character and institutional priorities that had characterized her entire period of captivity while demonstrating humanitarian commitment that transcended conventional boundaries. Personal relationships developed during extended facility operations showed individual dedication to humanitarian principles that challenged assumptions about racial hierarchy and social organization, while providing evidence of cultural values that prioritized human dignity and individual respect. The provision of documentation and personal effects during repatriation procedures demonstrated American attention to individual dignity and administrative competence that exceeded conventional expectations while maintaining organizational effectiveness throughout complex logistical operations. Individual personnel continued to demonstrate professional competence and personal concern that transcended routine obligations while maintaining humanitarian priorities and cultural sensitivity throughout final processing procedures. As repatriation operations commenced, Maria recognized the permanent impact of her experiences on understanding human character, military competence, and humanitarian commitment, while acknowledging the transformation of assumptions about race, nationality, and social organization that had resulted from extended interaction with American forces. The consistency of individual behavior and institutional priorities throughout her captivity had demonstrated capabilities and character that exceeded every expectation while challenging fundamental assumptions about cultural development and human dignity. The successful completion of repatriation procedures marked the conclusion of a period that had transformed understanding of military competence, humanitarian commitment, and individual character, while demonstrating American capabilities and priorities that exceeded conventional expectations. The experience had challenged every assumption about race, nationality, and social organization, while providing evidence of human dignity and cultural values that transcended conventional boundaries and historical animosity. During final departure procedures, Maria acknowledged the permanent transformation of her understanding regarding human character, military competence, and humanitarian commitment, while recognizing the implications of her experiences for future relationships and social development. The American forces who had captured, protected, and maintained her welfare throughout extended captivity had demonstrated individual character and institutional priorities that exceeded every expectation, while challenging assumptions that had formed the basis of her previous understanding. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.